And we're back with one of my favorite parts of the show. It's time, of course, for the Malzberg panel. This is part one. We get to keep them for 2 segments tonight. Joining us, Noelle Nikpour, Republican strategist, political consultant, and the author of Branding America. In Los Angeles, Larry Elder, a radio host on of course, the Larry Elder Show. He, too, is an author of Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours. And, of course, Betsy McCoy is with us and will participate with us in the panel. Everybody, welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're allowed to say hello. Nice to be here. Let's start with the first topic I want to talk about. Today we're finding that the Iranians are actually calling out the United States for lying about the agreement. Larry, because you are furthest away, we'll let you begin. What do you think about this?
I'm shocked at this distrust between the Iranians and the Americans.
There's gambling in Las Vegas, yeah?
Within hours of Obama and Kerry during their victory lap, the head negotiator of Iran said that they were lying, that they're not going to shut down any of their nuclear installations. They're not going to allow the sanctions to be lifted gradually. They want them lifted right away. They're not going to transport the uranium to a third party. And in fact, they can still sell enriched uranium for money. So it appears that the 2 parties negotiated a very different deal than they think they negotiated.
So, Noelle, do you think we should be surprised by this, considering that on this 4-page document that's been floated around, nobody's signature was on it?
Well, you know, what was it that Bibi Netanyahu said? The enemy of our enemy is still our enemy. You know, we can't trust Iran. And furthermore, I like how the fact that Twitter was put to use on the Iran nuke deal, which is a very serious matter, and it's been taken to Twitter. You know, I think this is a little bizarre, but no, you know, no deal is ready to go until it is signed. So it may have been just a little premature.
And after all, Rick, the other partners in this negotiation are also backing off. France has said, oh, a lot more work needs to be done on this, quote, deal.
Well, I mean, that too is interesting. I have to say, I'm not that surprised that the Iranians might try and paint a different picture back home. They have a lot of hardliners to agree with. But it was surprising, Betsy, as you raised, the French did come out this morning and kind of say, not so fast. There's still a lot more work to be done here. It does leave you wondering if one of our allies and and the opposition, Iran in this case, if they're poo-pooing the deal, what can we expect? Larry, you can answer this, of the members of Congress who are not so keen to go through with this.
Well, I think they're going to have a difficult time, including with some of the Democrats. I said from the very beginning, Israel's not a part of these negotiations, even though the country that has the most to lose because of the negotiations. Why wasn't recognition of Israel as a Jewish state part of this deal from the very beginning? If you're trying to give Israel some confidence that Iran's not going to bomb them, how about initially starting with the recognition of Israel as a Jewish state?
Well, that's such an important point. I'd like to underscore that because Iran has no credibility as a partner to any kind of treaty so long as Iran's leaders continue to say that they are determined to annihilate Israel.
You know what? I mean, let me just raise this. We've had a lot of conversation about things like that. Obviously, you're right, Larry. They should say that. They should also stop saying death to America. Right. They should stop saying all these things. Yeah. But, you know, you have to admit, even if they were to say in an agreement that, all right, we're going to stop calling for the destruction of Israel, we're going to stop saying that the United States is the Antichrist and all these terrible things, they probably wouldn't mean it. Don't you agree, Nicole?
Well, I think that, yeah, and I think that these deals are frivolous. I mean, I don't really think that Iran can be trusted, number one, and even though, you know, they're saying that in their deal, in their eyes, that they wanted all the sanctions removed, you've got to remember what was it Obama said in 2012 that he declared that the only deal that we're going to accept is to end the nuclear program in Iran, and that's not what we're seeing in the talks of this.
Isn't it so that no deal means they just keep building the bomb? So
that is incorrect.
Go ahead.
That is incorrect. The alternatives that the president has posed, this deal or war, that is a false choice. We could have imposed even tougher sanctions on Iran and literally reduced their economy to rubble. And that's what we should have done.
But with that, I agree with that. You could probably reduce their economy to rubble. My question, though, is, judging by what we've seen so far, where we did put some fairly intense, I agree with you, Betsy, that we could do more. they kept developing the bomb. Yes, their people were suffering, and their people would suffer more. We're going to go into more of what we could possibly do without an agreement when we come back. We're coming back with more of the Malzberg panel. It should be good. You don't want to go anywhere. Stay with us. You're watching the Steve Malzberg program right here on Newsmax TV. Back with the Malzberg panel, part 2, the sequel. Joining us, Noelle Nikpour, Republican strategist, political consultant, and most importantly, author of Branding America. Larry Elder out in LA, radio host of The Larry Elder Show. Author of Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours. Betsy McCoy, do you have a book you want to pitch?
Yes, Beating Obamacare 2014.
I didn't want to leave you out of that. So when we last left off in the last segment, we were talking about what some possible alternatives are when it comes to Iran. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we want to move on to what's happening with jobs. Larry, quick answer. What would you do if we don't sign a deal?
I think it was Noelle who said we can put on tougher sanctions. It was the sanctions that brought them to the table in the first place. That option ought to be on up to and including the military option.
Well, if you and Noelle are just going to say the same thing, I'm going to go right to Betsy.
Celebrate. I would celebrate if there's no deal, and certainly the people of Israel will celebrate because the parameters of this deal are deadly to the future of Israel.
All right, let's move on to the jobs report out this morning that shows a pretty lackluster month. I think 186,000 jobs were created, well below what we've gotten used to seeing the past few months. Maybe more disturbing, we're seeing some record lows in the participation rate, the number of people over 16 who are actually going to work every day. Noelle, we'll start with you. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of people are not retiring. You know, they'll either, there's 2 reasons why a lot of people are not retiring, and that's A, they can't afford to retire, or B, you know, I know a lot of people that I deal with, I deal with bundlers for political campaigns, which are usually kind of the billionaire or whatever. And a lot of these guys and gals are 75 and 80 years old, and they are still in the workforce, and they're power brokers like Warren Buffett, Carl Icahn, etc. And I feel like a lot of people are not wanting to leave because they're so useful. They're useful.
Betsy, if people aren't retiring, wouldn't that take the participation rate higher?
Yes, I was going to point out, though, in regard to what Nicole said, that older people are suffering disproportionately in this economy because older people who have their money in equities, they're doing fine. But older people who have their savings in bonds and other interest-bearing vehicles are really suffering. Even if you just have your money in a savings account in the bank, you're getting zero, zip. It's really terrible, and these low interest rates are the cruelest tax on savers, especially the elderly.
So, Larry, in trying to figure out the low participation rate in the workforce, how much should we be considering or not considering the baby boomers? They're now reaching, I say them, I'm one of them, are reaching the point where they're starting to retire, as Noelle points out, not as much as they might have in the past, because they do need to keep working, but they're starting to retire. How much of this affects the participation rate?
It affects it to a degree, but as Noelle pointed out, a lot of older people are continuing to work because they have to. And this is the worst economic recovery arguably ever, certainly the worst one since the Great Depression. The labor force participation rate, that's the number of people, able-bodied workers or people looking for work, is the lowest since 1978.
That's right.
This recovery has been a 2% recovery as opposed to Reagan's 4%, which means millions and millions and millions of people are looking for jobs, or they're underemployed or working part-time when they'd rather work full-time. This has been a lousy recovery.
The data show that the young are being disproportionately hit by this low participation in the labor force.
Let me ask this of Nicole, because it goes back to her point. If this is the case, if in fact older people are working longer, and I think you're all right that they are, then sooner or later they've got to stop working. They're just going to get too old. Is that what it's going to take to open the floodgates?
I think that the solution to this problem in a nutshell would be to create more jobs so you give a chance for everybody to have a job.
And how much, Noelle, do you think, we talked about this a bit earlier, how much of this do you think can be laid at the feet of technology, finally reaching the point of taking away jobs?
An example would be Bitcom, where you have everything, everything eliminated by technology. So look for a lot of jobs to be eliminated due to technology.
Guys, that's all the time we got. I could do it all day. I love the Malzberg panel. Noelle Nikpour, Larry Elder, and of course, our own Betsy McCoy. Guys, you were great. Good subjects. There's lots more to talk about, but we can't do it anymore, so you're going to have to stick around, because coming up next is Malzberg's favorite segment. It's time for Gimme 5 here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Stay with us.